let you eat. Red velvet, it's a cake I'm gonna make, yeah. All right, let's make a red velvet cake. Now look, I'm giving you a disclaimer right now. This is not the red velvet cake that you think it is. There's no food coloring in this entire recipe, not an ounce, not a drop. But this is the historical recipe. This is the real recipe. This is the original recipe for a red velvet cake, okay? There's no like tricks to this, so we're just gonna get right in there the way that you always make a cake. Unsalted butter, that's where we start. Now, this is maybe a little different than most cakes. Usually we're using regular old white granulated sugar, but for this historical recipe, we're using light brown sugar. We are just gonna cream this together. It's gonna go for longer than you think. You actually need to beat this together for about 5 minutes to really get it light and fluffy. We're gonna do some AP flour. Now, ordinarily, I'm not a huge fan of sifting things, but for this cake, because it is supposed to be super light and fluffy and the texture is really important, I actually think for this recipe, it's worth it. The next thing we're gonna do is some cake flour. You know we gotta have some salt. Baking soda, very important. We'll get that together. Great. So this has gotten super light and fluffy. It's lightened in color a little bit, and that's exactly what you're looking for. All right, I'm just gonna scrape down the sides of our bowl. I don't know if you're aware, but red velvet cake is just chocolate cake colored with food coloring. It's chocolate. It's a chocolate cake. I don't know if you guys knew that. That means we are making a chocolate cake today, which means that we have to be using cocoa powder. Now, this cocoa powder right here, this one right here in this bowl, it's not just your regular old cocoa powder from the grocery store. In fact, it is cacao. I've been waiting for like 2 weeks to say that. The difference is this is unprocessed. Now, somewhere in the 1800s, cocoa producers started alkalizing their cocoa powder. What is that, Elise? You just said some science. Okay. That means that they started taking out the acid in cocoa powder because the acid in this is going to turn red when it's baked. And that's why it's a red velvet cake. Boom. Okay, you have to sift this stuff. Can you see in there? It's like pebbles. It has to be sifted. So take your time. And if they don't all sift, throw away what's gonna not sift out. All right, you know my motto, good enough. So now we just need to whisk our dry ingredients together. We've got our cocoa powder, cacao powder, AP flour, some cake flour, some salt, and some baking soda. Butter and sugar. The next step, as per usual, eggs. So let's get 1 egg. There we go. So, buttermilk, very important for our fact of the day. So velvet cakes actually date back all the way to like the early 1800s. There were all kinds of velvet cakes, and they just referred to cakes that were made with baking soda and buttermilk. You know how this works. We're gonna start with some dry ingredients. We're gonna add a little wet ingredients. Back and forth, back and forth. Here we go. A cloud of cacao. Stand back, stand back, stand back. I really just want to be Stevie Nicks when I grow up, you know? I always recommend that you start and you finish with your dry ingredients. So I'm kind of adding our last little bit of buttermilk. Now, in some recipes at this point, they would tell you like, stop beating this batter. It needs to go into a cake pan immediately. Not this one. We actually want to let this go on low for a few minutes to help make sure that everything is really fully combined. So I'm going to leave this running on low for a few minutes, and then we're going to go into our cake pans. Boom! So I know what you're thinking. This is brown. I'm aware. Here's the thing, it's not gonna start to turn red until after we bake this cake. So we've gotta get it in the oven and then you'll see what I see. I'm sure, I feel confident. All right, so I've got 3 9-inch cake layers. These have got parchment in bottom, and some baking spray. Baking spray is like regular old cooking spray, but it also has flour in it. You must stir this. I know you're like, Elise, it just went for like 5 minutes, but a machine cannot intuit that there is buttermilk stuck on the side. It does not know. All right, ice cream scoop. If you are trying to make sure that your cake layers are even, this is one of the best ways to do it besides like actually getting your kitchen scale out. All right, so just smooth out your batter in all of your pans. Great. Now these just go in the oven, 325 for 30 minutes. Yes, look at that beautiful, gorgeous chocolate cake. Let's make a frosting. Okay, we gotta talk again. You're thinking red velvet cake can only be made with cream cheese frosting. I have news for you. It's not the original. The original frosting recipe is called ermine frosting or boiled milk frosting. I know, you're like, Elise, this is not red velvet cake at all. And I'm like, it is. This is the historic version. We're essentially going to make a roux, and we're gonna be using flour and full-fat milk and sugar and a little salt. Gotta have a little salt. Over medium heat, you're just gonna bring this up to a simmer. Now, you gotta stay with this. This is not a thing you can really walk away from because the flour will start to stick to the bottom and it will burn if you're not stirring it. So you just gotta kind of stay with it. So this is gonna start off pretty soupy, but pretty quickly, once it comes up to a simmer, it's gonna turn into kind of a thick custard-like situation. A note about the flour in this. You'll want to make sure that you sift your flour before it goes in here. That was already sifted. It's really hard to get out any clumps of flour if you haven't already sifted this. So note to self, go the extra mile, keep you from having a lumpy custard, which sounds like a punk band. The lumpy custards. Okay, we're already there. So we're gonna turn this guy off and we're gonna go ahead and pull him out before he scalds on the bottom. This now needs to cool for about a half hour to 45 minutes. So into the fridge we go. Da, 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 da. First things first, put your butter in the bowl. How much butter? An entire box. So we're just gonna give this a little mix to get it going. Get some air in there. All right, our butter's ready. So we're just gonna add this custard a little bit at a time. Already starting to lighten in color. It's starting to get really, really fluffy. Voila! Ermine frosting. It's time to assemble. First things first, I've got to get my cake layers out of the fridge. Here I go. I think it's a lot easier to level a cake when it's cold than if you're trying to do it even when it's room temperature. It helps to have a very sharp serrated knife for this. Okay, moment of truth. This is the big reveal where you actually can tell that this cake is kind of red, okay? Especially right here, that has got a distinct red hint to it. Now, I'll say it's red in the way that a Dr. Pepper is red, where you're like, kind of, like it's got a little hint. So during the 1930s, a very rich businessman named John A. Adams from Austin, Texas, went on a lovely vacation with his wife, Betty. Now, Mr. Adams owned a very successful business called the Adams Extract Company. So he sold food coloring, and he sold vanilla extract, and other kinds of imitation flavoring. And they went to go visit the Waldorf Astoria, and they had their famous red velvet cake. And then they decided, I think I can do one better. And so he made this packaged box cake mix that included his red food coloring, plus imitation butter flavor, and all of the other ingredients that you would need in order to make this cake. And with that came the instructions on how to make ermine or boiled milk frosting. Before we go any further, I have to tell you what the tagline for this box cakes mix was. The cake of a lifetime. The cake of a lifetime was the tagline for that cake. All right, moving on. Now, you can kind of tell this is a very tender cake. And because of that, we are definitely going to need to do a crumb coat on this. All right, let's do another layer. Last one. So let's do our crumb coat. So we did our crumb coat. We've given it a little bit of time to set up. Let's do our final frosting. Let's take a slice out, shall we? We're doing this slice of cake that you wish you ate every time. Here we go. Oh, yeah. I mean, I see that it's red. I don't know about you. This is what I want red velvet cake to taste like. I mean, the texture is exactly what you want a velvet cake to be. You know, that crumb is really light and tender. You can actually tell that it's chocolate, and you can't taste any food coloring because there isn't any in there. It's really good, and personally, I think that this is my favorite version. So, if you enjoyed this recipe, please be sure to like, share, subscribe. Please give it a try. Let me know what you think, if you like this one better or if you prefer the one with the red food coloring. To each their own is what I say, but I would love to hear your opinion. Just gonna go off here and eat a full 6 of a cake.